Hi guys, welcome back to episode 2 of our podcast. My name's Eve and I'm going to be your host again today. With me, I have my two lovely friends, Jenny and Tori.
Hey guys.
Hey guys.
Before we begin, I just want to say if you haven't already, to have a look at episode 1. It's out now. In it, we discuss who we are and we talk to our special guest, Professor Jacqui Rodgers, about change and uncertainty. Today we are going to be rejoined by Jacqui to discuss this further and get a better understanding of where we can get support, as well as getting some amazing top tips to use in the future. I think at that we can jump straight into our questions.
Can uncertainty ever be a good thing?
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, I think it absolutely can. If you think about some of the things that we enjoy doing, then often they have an element of uncertainty to them. I was thinking about this at the weekend when I was watching the Strictly Come Dancing show on Sunday and thinking part of the reason why I enjoy the programme is the kind of, I guess, the uncertainty about how people are going to do when they do their dance and who's going to win and who's going to be eliminated. So lots of the things that we spend time doing and are interested in pursuing, if we think about it, have an element of uncertainty that's actually enjoyable. If you enjoy watching sport, then often it's because there's some kind of uncertainty. Obviously, you might have a favourite team who you want to win, but the kind of draw, the kind of interest is are they going to win? So there are lots and lots of ways in which we seek out uncertainty in our lives, I think, and that can be an enjoyable and an exciting thing to be involved with.
Why can it be helpful for young people to add uncertainty into their daily lives?
That's a really good question. And I think the reasons that it can be helpful for people to introduce elements of uncertainty into their lives is because it will provide them with evidence that actually when uncertainty happens, it's something that they are able to deal with and are able to cope with. And that when uncertainty happens in our lives, it doesn't inevitably mean that there's going to be a bad or an unhelpful outcome to uncertainty. It enables us to develop skills and strategies to deal with uncertainty when it comes along and to be more confident when uncertainty occurs. So it can be really, really helpful to practice dealing with uncertainty in everyday situations. It can be a really, really helpful life skill to develop.
How and why should young people try and put uncertainty into their routine?
So by embedding uncertainty into your routine, you are giving yourself the opportunity to begin to practice some of the strategies that might help us to feel more comfortable in uncertain situations. It's allowing us to problem solve in those situations and to build confidence to deal with uncertainty, more readily and with a bit more confidence as it happens.
What activities can young people do to help them manage change and uncertainty?
So one of the things that people can do is that they can, embed opportunities in their lives to face uncertainty and to develop the skills in doing that. And that can be things like just trying out something new that they haven't tried before. So it could be things like going to a new restaurant or visiting a new place or just doing something in a different routine than previously. And actually through developing those opportunities for practice, we learn how to deal with uncertainty a little bit better. If people are struggling with uncertainty in their daily lives, as we've all done, I think, a lot recently with the pandemic, then also including in their daily lives things like a routine and some structure can also be helpful, as can spending a bit of time in the present and doing things that are fun and enjoyable to try and reduce the amount of time that's spent worrying and feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that young people can take on board and try and use. I think next we're going to discuss about how any negative emotions and people may have towards feeling uncertain.
What techniques can young people use to manage their emotions when things are uncertain?
So there's a number of different techniques that young people could use if they're feeling worried about the future and the uncertainty that that might hold, or feeling a bit overwhelmed because they don't know what's going to happen. One of them is to perhaps talk to other people about how they're feeling and actually share some of those thoughts and experiences. And through doing that, I think people will discover that, uncertainty is, it's an inevitable thing that we all experience. And it's not something that is unique to that person. It doesn't make them different in any way. That, this is something that is a very common way to feel. And in talking to other people as well, you get to learn the sorts of things that they do to help them to cope. And that can be a really, really helpful thing to do. In addition, if people are feeling overwhelmed by uncertainty, then spending time doing things that are predictable and kind of, focusing on the things that are controllable can be really helpful. So if we think about the COVID pandemic, there were so many things that were out of control or out of our kind of control for all of us, things that were uncertain, that we had no influence over. But there were things in our lives that we could influence and that we could make more certain. Our daily routine, what we spent our time doing, and what, the kinds of activities that we engaged in. So if a young person is feeling really overwhelmed with uncertainty, then focusing on those more controllable aspects of life can be really helpful in reducing that feeling of overwhelm and feeling of anxiety. And related to that, spending a bit of time in the present moment can really help to reduce worries and anxiety. So whether that's doing something like a mindfulness technique, or whether it's just engaging in a favourite hobby or pursuit, or having a chat on the phone to your friends, those kinds of things can really help to manage emotions related to uncertainty.
When do you think is the best time to use these techniques?
I think that the sorts of techniques that I've described can pretty much be kind of embedded within our daily routines. And I guess the best time to use them would be when somebody is feeling overwhelmed. Now, sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes if I get super anxious or I feel really overwhelmed, I find it difficult to kind of step back and say, okay, what do I need to do here to make myself feel better? When your emotions are really at a height, it can be quite difficult to kind of bring a kind of rational strategy to bear on that situation. So spending a bit of time learning to recognize when you're starting to feel a bit anxious or a bit overwhelmed, and then using those techniques then can be super helpful, because then you're kind of still able to influence your emotions a little bit more, rather than waiting until things become super overwhelming, and then it's a bit harder to introduce those strategies.
Why do you think coping techniques are important?
Coping techniques are a really good life skill to have. They help us to deal with situations as they arise in our everyday lives. And having a range of coping techniques is always something that I would suggest is a good idea, a kind of toolbox of techniques, if you like. Because some coping techniques are it's possible to use in some situations and not others. So having coping techniques will help us to manage the challenges that we face in life and in relation to uncertainty with a bit more confidence, and that will help to manage our well-being.
What 5 tips would you give to a young person who regularly worries about their future being uncertain?
Well, first of all, I think I would say that it's perfectly natural to worry about uncertainty. The world is an uncertain place. It's an inevitability of life. And it's something that, many people will spend time at some points worrying about. So it's a really normal, everyday experience to worry about these things. That doesn't mean that those worries aren't important, and it doesn't invalidate those feelings in any way. But I think it's sometimes helpful to realize that this is something that's a shared experience and something you might be able to talk to other people about. It might not always be possible for us to reduce the uncertainty in our worlds. I mean, I think we've all seen that, haven't we, with the pandemic. So some uncertain situations we won't be able to make more certain. And it may not be helpful for that to be the case. So given that, I think it's important to try and advocate to young people that they are able to begin to develop skills to help them to be able to cope with uncertainty a little bit more as it happens, and not to always try and avoid uncertain situations, and actually trying to introduce some element of uncertainty into our daily lives can be super helpful for us to begin to develop those really important skills. In addition to that, if somebody is worrying about their future, it might be useful for them to spend some time thinking about the present and focusing on the present in whatever way makes sense to them. And people do this in different ways, and it just depends on your preferences. You might do that through doing things like meditation or mindfulness, or it might be through cooking or going for a run or listening to some music or reading a book, whatever works for you. And that, there's no right answers here. It's about what works for you. And then finally, some young people tell me that they find it really helpful if they have lots and lots of worries to introduce a kind of worry time to their day, where they can kind of say, okay, at a set time during the day, I'm going to set aside some time to focus on the things that I'm concerned about. And if those thoughts pop into my head at other times of the day, I can then put them mentally or even physically by writing it down into my worry box, and I'll revisit them at that particular time. And that worry time is time limited, about half an hour maybe, where you'll sit down with a parent or a friend or maybe on your own and just think about those situations that are concerning you and try and think of solutions to some of the issues that have arisen. That helps to really minimize the feeling of being overwhelmed and having all of these worrisome thoughts in your head all of the time, which can be really distressing and really exhausting. So some young people tell me that having a worry time can be really, really helpful for them.
When should young people fit worry time into the day, and how can you fit it around exam revision?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it really is something that's quite a personal thing. I would suggest perhaps not doing it too close to bedtime, because often people describe that it's that time when they go to bed and, they're kind of lying there in the dark that all of their worries might come to the fore. So having worry time that's not too close to bedtime is something that I would suggest giving a try. But other than that, I think, fitting something into your routine, whatever that may be, would be the right way to approach it. So it may be that you have a little bit of a time in the morning or before lunch when it would be a good time to do it. But I guess the key thing is to not be too rigid about worry time, and actually, use this as a helpful and a useful technique to fit into your routine, rather than being really kind of focused on having to do it and then worrying about fitting your worry time in, because that might, might then backfire a little bit. And absolutely thinking about exam time and revision time is really, really important. If you have an exam timetable or a revision timetable, maybe actually setting aside some time on the timetable for worry time, if that's a technique you want to use, might be a good way to approach it.
How do you control worrying outside of your worry time?
That again is a really good question, and young people who use worry time tell me that actually having the worry time helps them to control their worries, that's kind of one of the purposes and benefits of having worry time, is that when a kind of a worrisome thought pops into their mind, they can say, okay, I hear you, I recognize you, I will deal with you later, to that worrisome thought. And they can either write it down on a piece of paper, and I know some young people who actually have a box that they post their worries into, that they maybe then share with a parent and they can go through it together. Other people will just make a mental note of the worries to revisit at their worry time. But actually having worry time means that the young person can say to themselves, I'm not trying to ignore this worry. I recognize this is something I need to think about and maybe try and find a solution to, but actually I have a special time when I can do that, so I don't need to worry about that right at this moment.
That was a really good answer, but what 5 things can young people do to help with that?
To help with worrying about uncertainty. So I think there are a number of different things that young people can do. I think, first of all, recognizing that uncertainty is kind of going to happen, whether we want it to or not. Uncertainty is something that happens in our lives. And it might not always be possible, therefore, to get rid of the uncertainty. A go-to strategy that people who have difficulty with uncertainty often use is to try and reduce the uncertainty they're experiencing. And that's a really understandable thing to do. And I can think of lots of instances where I've tried to do that. But it's not always possible to get rid of the uncertainty, and possibly not always helpful to get rid of the uncertainty. So I would advise young people to try and sit with the uncertainty to some extent and to develop skills in doing so, and to try not to always use avoidance of uncertainty, because there will be situations that we simply can't avoid. Another good strategy to use if someone's worrying about uncertainty is to, uncertainty is about thinking about the future. It's about what is going to happen? What if this happens? What if that happens? So spending a bit of time not thinking about the future, but thinking about the present can really help to reduce the worries in that moment. And as I said, also maybe setting aside some time to address those worries at a different point in the day can help to manage the worries in the moment.
What would you do if you were busy and something came up and took over your worry time? What tips or advice would you give a young person if this did happen?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think it's great that you're busy and that the busyness has taken over your worry time, because that suggests that you're actually focusing on something in the here and now, and you're not letting those worries necessarily kind of intrude on your activity. If, for example, you scheduled your worry time to be at 2:00 in the afternoon and you were busy doing something else, then that's okay. It's okay to engage in worry time at a different point in the day, or maybe just to say, okay, I haven't done that today because I was busy doing other things. I was focusing on the present, but I'll have my worry time tomorrow. So I guess one of the pitfalls potentially of worry time is that people become really worried about not being able to get their worry time into their schedule, and that can backfire a little bit. So trying to be flexible about worry time, just in the same way that you might about other activities that you do in your daily routine, can be really helpful. So if you, for example, often go for a run in the morning, but for one morning you aren't able to do it, you might go for a run that day in the afternoon. And you can do worry time in exactly the same way. So you can be flexible where you need to be around fitting your worry time in.
What advice would you give to a young person who doesn't like writing down their worries because seeing them on paper makes them worry more?
Yeah, I think that's a really understandable experience for some people, isn't it? And I guess there are a number of different ways that you can tackle that. Some people don't like to write down their worries for exactly the reasons that you've described, and so they might make a mental note of their worries. Or they might record their worries onto a voice memo on their phone, and then come back during worry time and just talk about those worries. And again, it's about making this technique work for you in whatever way feels most comfortable for you. There's no right and wrong way to use worry time. It's about finding a method that actually meets your needs and that you feel comfortable with.
I think that's been some great advice on dealing with our worry time. I think next we wanted to talk about where people can get support if they are uncertain about anything going on in their lives.
Sure. So if you are a young person and you are experiencing worries about uncertainty or indeed about anything else in your life, and that's impacting on your daily life, then it is important to try and access some support. That can be done in a number of different ways. So some people find it really helpful to talk to a close friend who may understand exactly what they're going through and be able to share their experiences too. Or you may choose to talk to a parent or another family member about how you're feeling. Of course, some young people don't feel able to talk to a family member about how they're feeling. And in that instance, maybe talking to somebody in a school setting would be good, whether that's a school mentor or a wellbeing advisor in school or a form teacher who will either be able to provide some support to you or will be able to signpost you to other sources of support if that was felt to be appropriate. And of course, there are also medical professionals who may be able to help. And a first port of call, of course, would be a GP at your local medical centre.
How can young people get support with uncertainty?
So, if a young person is really concerned about uncertainty and their worries about uncertainty are having an impact, then they can get support from a number of different sources, either from friends or from family, but also from school or maybe from their local GP practice, if that's felt to be appropriate.
What if a young person is worrying about the future and can't talk to anyone they live with about their worries?
Then I guess, if they can't talk to anyone that they live with, then I guess I would, advise perhaps that they talk to someone at school or a close friend if they're able to. And many senior schools do have wellbeing or mental health mentors who would be very open to having conversations about concerns that young people have. If that young person isn't in school or doesn't have that available to them at school, then there are a number of online organisations or telephone-based organisations that young people would be able to talk to about their concerns, or they could go and talk to their GP.
How can I help other young people deal with change and uncertainty?
I mean, I think you are helping now through what you're doing is, I guess, the first thing that I would say. In relation to friends, then I guess being very open about any concerns or thoughts that you have about uncertainty is a really important first step. Actually hearing other young people saying, I was really worried about that, and this is how I tried to cope with it, can be really validating for young people. So I think that's a really, really important thing to be able to do, for us to be very open about our feelings and our emotions and reduce the stigma around those experiences can be super powerful. So I would certainly advocate that. And of course, you are shining examples of that through the work that you're doing here. Also, if you are really concerned about someone else's well-being, as well as talking to them, you could, guide them and advise them to speak to other people about how they're feeling and maybe support them to be able to do that.
I think that was our last question for today. I just want to say a huge thank you from all of us for taking time and giving us a greater insight on how to deal with change and uncertainty.
You're very welcome.